Hello, welcome to Human Design Book Club. We're so excited to be back with you again. Today, we are going to be talking about the first half, approximately, of Human Design by Jenna Zoe, pages 1 through 131. And here we are, your hosts. We have Jennifer Cordes, and she is the sacral generator, 3-5, quad right, mountains, cross of service.
Hey everyone.
We also, yeah. So we also have Kayla, and she's an emotional manifester, 1-3, Shores, cross of service. And myself, Rebecca Anderson, splenic projector, 2-4, quad right, mountains, cross of Maya. We envision a world where everyone can live their truth, everyone can make decisions easily, people are safe to tell their story, people get to have fun together, community supports us while giving us the freedom to explore our individual paths. And this book was published by Hay House, which we found pretty exciting and neat, which made it, extra special?
Mhm.
What would you say about that?
I mean, I am such a devotee of Louise Hay. Now, as far as I know, just what I've noticed, this was the first one that I've noticed of human design that was actually published by such a breakthrough spiritual publishing house. I think it's amazing. If I
Yes.
wasn't already in this world, it would make me look at it if I hadn't before.
Yeah, it's kind of a big deal to have Hay House publish a human design book. And you can see why they chose her. Like she
Mhm.
has a very soft, ease way of presenting the information, a very pretty spiritual look at it.
Mhm.
Definitely. And if you're listening, we are following along with some slides. So feel free to go into the notes and check these out, or check us out on the YouTube version. So we have some refreshing variations from this book. We have one, your soul chose this path versus dragged kicking and screaming into the vehicle. We have two, divine blueprint for your life versus an impersonal program experimenting with consciousness. We have three, life is for you and authority is your intuition, guiding you to fulfill your potential, versus reducing friction and resistance along the track of an impersonal geometry. And four, empowering profile and gate names designed to uplift versus negative interpretations designed to shatter. So when I was reading this book, I definitely really like it, just as a overall impression. What I like is just how flowy and positive the descriptions of everything are. And it really just like speaks to my heart and soul. And I didn't find anything blatantly or glaringly opposed to what we've learned. And that was also refreshing and maybe surprising, because I think I was looking for things that were going to be adverse to what we've been taught. And I actually just found it to be more of what we've been taught with a little bit of extra or a twist instead of being opposed. So, what did you guys think? And what are some of your thoughts about these various points?
Well, I think it's really funny that when we chose this book, knowing the human design community, some people are going to hate that we chose this book, and some people are going to love that we chose this book. Because if you're in human design for any point of time and you're kind of deep down the rabbit hole, you know that there are kind of different camps of people being okay with different descriptions and being very stuck on the keynotes. And we wanted to look at all of the paths. We have read a lot of raw and core material and studied very, how they would say, like the true path. And then we've also read a lot of this. And like Rebecca said, I didn't read anything that I felt like was totally off from what we learned too. And I had a hard time kind of getting into the book just because it is very base knowledge and we've kind of been there, done that. But as I continued on, I actually have a lot of notes on good reminders of the basics of this because that's what it's all about. Like, Rebecca, you're pretty good at saying, like, what do we need to know here? What's important? But Jen and I can get very, like, in the weeds of, like, what does this mean? And we're all deep in these things. And it's like, this was kind of a nice, just like, oh, yeah, like, this is kind of what it's all about. The basics is a really nice way to just, like, get back to it and remind myself what it's all about.
Because I don't, unless I went past it, I don't remember her even differentiating between black and red.
She very lightly did it when she talked about profile, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, but
Conscious or unconscious. Yeah,
she
yeah.
had described it as like your inner self versus your outer
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
self.
yeah.
And it was
Oh,
like a very like
yeah.
basic description. Yeah.
Because when it comes to the gates, I just remember like they were all presented. Of course, you could look up your own, and we'll cover that in our next one. But I just remember thinking it's equal weight, regardless, because it's not talking about planet. It's like there's so much where it's just you could open this up. And the thing that I like, well, I started with her, so I felt like I was coming back home because, and I'm so grateful for my official formal education. But at the time, I was always like, okay, where's the spirituality in this? Where's the reason? Where's like the gate names that make me feel good? Where's like the ways to really work with this? And of course, they're teaching the way Ra taught, which is very specific. But when I was going through this, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is why I fell in love with human design. Like I want someone to be able to speak to me in a way that makes my soul want to move higher, not smack me with a hammer. So when I was putting this slide together, this was a lot of, because I began with her and then I went through the formal training, this was really, these are the things that have been stuck in my craw for the past couple of years, because I thought, why does it have to be so impersonal? Why does it have to be a big program? Like, why can't it just be something that helps you feel better the way you are now? Why can't it be something that uplifts you, that you chose versus, some frequency got initiated and you're grabbed out of the ether? Like, it's just, oh, yeah. I think she has such a beautiful way of talking about things. So I was very glad to be coming back to this.
Some of the quotes from the book: you live your highest self when you're born with the gifts you need for this life. Every place and time has an energy. Your soul chooses the exact energy it needs as the perfect launch pad for your life. Your birth information tells us about who you inherently are. Identify that highest self and be true to it, rather than how you've been told you need to be, conditioning. Right. The process is one of unbecoming, rather becoming something you're not. And I really like this one about this whole choosing the time when we're born. We talked about that a little bit with the white book, but I feel like it was almost like her interpretation of how it all works, as far as your choosing. I feel like she's the one who really described it that way. And it's the one that makes sense to me.
And she's radically divergent from Ra. Like this is one of those paths where you go left or you go right, because essentially it's a program, it's impersonal, it's designed to pull you in, it's no choice at all. This is radically divergent from him, but it is what I happen to believe. Like I do think we choose our parents, we choose what we need. I don't think any of it is random.
Yeah. Well, and we have this discussion a lot of, if you don't believe every single thing Ross said, can you still believe human design, right? Open head problems that we have. And here she's taken a really beautiful way of looking at it, because I do have a hard time with the impersonality of it all that Ra often describes. And here she is making human design her life and her business, and she has this really beautiful way of looking at it, and that's okay for her. And so that's kind of a nice confirmation too, that it's like you can take and leave what works for you and what doesn't.
And I like too, because here she's obviously talking about deconditioning, but it's not with the sense of you've got to get out the scrub brush and chip away for 7 years. It's more that essence of it's already there. Just come home to it. It seems like things will release in a gentler, easier manner when you're not so focused on what you don't like. So I think that's another part too, is when we get to the next phase and we actually talk about they're not traits, they're gifts, right? They're not these impersonal things. There are parts that help you be who you're supposed to be. And it's like, if you focus on that, it's kind of very much about Abraham Hicks. Like if you're focused on the more positive things, not that we're stupid or in denial, like, you don't love this, you already know that. But as Einstein said, you can't solve a problem on the same level of thinking that created it, right? Like you can't go back in the mud and wonder why you're not clean. You have to get out of the puddle first and then be like, oh, this is what this is like. You can't be so focused on the mud over there. Like, take care of this. And then you'll know what to do because you're deciding from a higher vibration, not a lower one. I think that's a completely different way to talk about deconditioning than what we've been taught formally. It's just easier. And that's where I think also it becomes more important for whatever your foundation reading is or your first introduction to human design, how you lean into it. Marianne Winninger talked about when she was going through her process, she'd got like this beautiful frame, like you would put like your mate in, your partner, and she put her natal chart in there. And it was a way of, she looked at that every night before she went to bed. It's like this reminder of, I'm nurturing this, like, or what you would put like your child's picture in. It's like, this is what I'm nurturing, this is who I am. And when I was reading this, that's what kept going through my mind. It's just coming back to what's already true instead of being so worried about, well, I learned this from my mother and this came from my father and this came from here. It's just, you're not going to get where you want to go that way, or it won't feel good if you do.
Well, so next, one of the things she went into was the types. And this is, okay, I guess there are a few divergence, but there's one particular area that many would say is controversial, and that when it comes to generator, manifesting generator. But basically the types that she described is manifester, wild, strong, playful creatures, the cause, others are the effect, projector, see things in a way others can't, follow your fascination, reflector, radically receptive, mirror, ultimate chameleons, generator, creators of good energy in the world, excitement isn't random and leads to the best outcome, manifesting generator, multi-passionate, can pivot, chart previously unseen life paths. And so I love these descriptions, and they're mainly along with what we've learned before. But I would say what the one difference, the way she describes the manifesting generator, and this is a quote directly from the book, it's a hybrid of the two other types, generators and manifestors. So when it comes to this type of controversy, however, to me, I've been pondering it. And the way she describes it, she still brings back generator and manifesting generator, same authority responding, which is one of the key points. And to me, if you are a manifesting generator, which none of us are, so I'd be curious to hear from MGs, does it resonate with you or not? I guess that's the other kind of point of a lot of these questions. In your experiment, how does considering yourself a hybrid versus considering yourself just a generator type, how does that work for you, right? So that's what some of these questions are all about in my interpretation. And I do also have some other quotes specifically about projectors that I loved. But tell me what you guys were thinking about when she described some of the types here.
I thought when I was writing it up, I thought, well, Kayla is just a horse galloping in a field, a willful, strong, playful creature. Like, I thought that's interesting. I thought that was a delightful way to look at it. Yeah, I just saw you like praising out in the field. Like, that's how it seems, the way she talked about it. Yeah. And the more fun you have, the more other people want to watch you do your thing or join in.
Yeah, they were very, very nice descriptions, I thought. And it is interesting, the manifesting generator part. I remember in formal training, learning or something, a quote along the lines of like a manifesting generator, they're the only ones who really ask if they're different or not because it's like they want to be different. And I thought that was kind of harsh. So like, oh, I don't really like, that. But I could see how a manifesting generator would feel different, just like an energy projector would feel different than that. And so there are these differentiations and specifics to where you could even go into a generator, a projector, or a manifester. And like I'm a manifester with no manifesting channels.
Mhm.
So I assume that my experience as a manifester is vastly different from a manifester who has those core manifesting channels versus a projector who's an energy projector and who's not. So I think when you are really looking at that, it's like we do in this book, it's the generator and the manifesting generator, but you can go really deep into all the types and how specific and different they can be. I think manifesting generators are so common that it's almost like I could see how a lot of people think they deserve their own specific name because that 3420 is very common. And so I don't know what the stats are of how many generators versus manifesting generators there are, but I would assume it would be, maybe not half and half, but pretty common to have an MG as a
That's
generator.
how
So,
together you come up with about 70%.
yeah.
Generator, well, back when the stats were run, generators were 37%, MGs were 33%.
hmm
It's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. So, and I could see how their experience would be different having the motor to the throat. Just like how my experience as a manifester with no manifesting channels is probably a lot different than a typical manifester. So, yeah.
There's just so many nuances. And even I think it might be in your design, Jen, even a generator that might have their sacral defined through an unconscious channel, that's going to be different than if it's conscious as well. So, and then what were you saying?
I was gonna say, they feel different to me. Like a splenic projector versus an energy projector versus a mental projector. Like I've known all three, they feel different. MGs feel different to me versus emotional MGs versus ego generators. Like I can tell, like I kind of agree. I know technically their aura is still the same. However, even Ra treated them differently for the sleeping recommendation. So there's something there. Now, maybe it's still the encompassing aura. Great. But something's going on enough that he gave hybrid recommendations for sleep.
hmm
Yeah, they feel different to me.
I love, okay, so even though projectors are interested in the other, I still love hearing things about projectors. So I loved reading her description about it, and I highlighted some of the quotes here. She said, "You're here to show, present, teach, consult, or guide others toward a newer, better way, no matter what your actual job title is." And maybe I focus in on some of this stuff because I am still seeking the next level of success in career and business. Another quote was, "All projectors have specific areas or subjects that they see so clearly. Those are the subjects they are meant to focus on and get so good at. If you're trying to figure out what those are, it's easy. They're the subjects that absolutely fascinate you." Like human design. The universe made them fascinating to you specifically because they are tied to your purpose. Follow the areas of life you could learn about or talk about all day. Those are the areas you are meant to apply your seeing gifts to. Your fascinations are not random, they are divine. And as I'm reading that, I recognize that she did talk about that a lot with the other types as well, as far as follow your passion, right? So that's kind of a theme for all of us. It's just, and then it's just a different way of applying that.
So yours felt good to you to read then.
Very good.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Generator is hard because as much as you think it would be so simple, like Rod talked about when he began, he's like, "Oh, I'll be done with this in a snap. I just have to wake up the generators." But it's like the idea of Well, if you're full of a lot of gunk or sludge, it's hard to figure out what even turns you on. But then once you do, it's just that idea of someone invites you to a party and you're like, it's not right for you. There is backslash. So I could see a lot of times where it sounds easy. And I like the way she talks about it because it's kind of a paradigm to strive for, even if you don't always get there. So I think sometimes even when we're out of alignment, we can, or at least I can, judge myself for not getting to the goal. But I'm like, at least I've recognized the goal this time, versus how many times in my life was I just doing what I thought would get me approval, and that was all I worried about. And like, at least recognizing that, oh, I didn't totally follow my gut there, or it took me a minute, but then I followed my gut. Like, I think it's just a way to hold that together, as opposed to thinking, well, that's going to add another year to your deconditioning process. It makes things a little easier.
Yeah, she had made a point to talk about how your life is always going to be a mixture of your signature and your not self, which I think is a nice reminder too, because we can get into the trap of feeling like any not self is just you're totally off track and everything is wrong and bad. And it was a nice little like soft reminder that there is always going to be a mixture of the both.
Yeah. It's not a failure. It's just part of the human experience.
Yeah. And one thing she talked about, which had me really thinking, she had said in the projector talk that projectors are often focused on success and don't judge your desire to be successful. And it had me thinking about all of the types and how, if you're friends with a projector, they might say like, well, why wouldn't you want more success? Like, don't limit yourself. You should be doing these things. And here I am like, well, why would you do that? Does that even bring you peace? Right. And so it's like by type, you can see where the other person is supposed to be focused. And if you are not focused on that, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It's just that you probably have a different goal in life of sorts. And so I thought that was kind of a neat reminder of all the types and how, you know, our goals are going to be different and kind of what the big picture of success looks like for us, or that true feeling of just like goodness.
It was like when we talked about circuitry and you had mentioned that reminder of like, oh, not everybody is focused on improving things. Not like, because we think the way we are is the way that everyone is. Yeah. Not everyone is so worried about satisfaction. They just want to be peaceful, completely different.
Yeah. And it's so funny because it's such a basic knowledge, but it clicked differently for me. So that's why I love reading and listening different people and authors, because just one little thing can make something click in a way that didn't before. And that really had me click and be like, oh yeah, like projectors are just going to be more focused on success, and I'm going to be more focused on what brings peace. And, generators are going to be more focused on that feeling of satisfaction when they do things. Like,
and to not judge each other for it, because aside from thinking, well, why don't you want this? Especially on a woman, we can think, well, she's just too ambitious. We might let that be okay in a man. Like, I know things are changing, so I'm probably speaking maybe a decade ago, but even then it's like, it's completely natural, versus I can judge myself for thinking I completely charged my battery by watching Once Upon a Time all day yesterday and knitting. Like,
I love that show.
I always think it's like the perfect gate for 56, because you're telling me a story. I'm lost in a fantasy. It's really well put together, and my brain can just like freaking relax. And then my hands have something to do. Generators have the motion, right? He would talk about them like shuffling papers, moving back and forth. But I can judge that and say, well, you could have gotten farther in your studies. Or I could say, oh my gosh, my battery has a better capacity for the coming week because I gave myself quiet time with my dog just to relax. And if I'm telling that to an MG, a pure MG with 3420, they can go through their list of 30 things they got done yesterday, and that was perfect for them. But I'm sure they could look at me and think, well, you are lazy. And it's like, no, I just needed that, and that gave me pleasure. Yeah, so it's how we see each other, but I think it's also we compare ourselves to other people, and it's that reminder of whatever that internal dialogue is you'll know it's right for you regardless of the mental noise, because it's just going to feel like some part of you feels like it's home. You're coming back to yourself. And that's where I think she talks about what the natal chart is, that blueprint for your higher self. Like, you're designed to find satisfaction, peace, success, whatever. that's the doorway and that's your door. There's nothing wrong with it. If it's red or green or blue, who cares? Just find your color and go through it.
I love it. I feel like I could keep talking about that, but there's so much more to cover. A few more quotes. Everything you want is meant to come to you. Hmm. Manifesting is stepping up to the next level of who you're capable of being. Wow, that's a good one. I'm just like enjoying these. Your aura expands to hold the bigger level of your life, and it drops right in. When you're totally sure of something because life has kept putting it at your door, not because you've shitted yourself into thinking you want to do it, your energy is aligned. And whenever we act from a place of alignment, is when things easily fall into place without much effort from your behalf. This is you being carried. And that was from the reflector section, but we can apply that. We can really apply that to all the types.
And I like that idea of the repetition coming around, especially if somebody has emotional authority in general. But if you're a generator, you can think, well, I'm supposed to know right now, but that emotional authority, because I didn't really do anything on the authorities, is guiding you for the correct timing. And it's like, if it keeps showing up and you keep getting that offer, or you're seeing that thing on TV or Instagram or whatever, and like there's still something there, it's kind of like if you're still responding to it, or you're still recognizing it, or you're still seeing it as correct for you. I like that idea of that's not just a reflector thing. Like I took that to heart for myself as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when she talks about authorities, she had said a quote that is kind of why I fell into human design to begin with, because I was struggling with decision making. And she had said, imagine if you never had to stress about the right decision because you could always rely on your inbuilt mechanism to tell you, this is how simple and clear it's meant to be. And I thought that was beautiful and also kind of tricky because, as we know, it's not that simple. I think we all still struggle with correct decision making, even though we've been practicing this for almost 3 years now. And so it's I loved that reminder of why I fell in love with human design to begin with, but then also that it's maybe not quite that simple. There are so much more nuances when it comes to decision making that really just come from experimenting. But I'm like, yeah, that's why I fell in love with human design, because I'm like, oh, I have something to experiment with to help me make decisions in life.
Mm-hmm.
I love that so much. And when you were reading it, I was like, oh yeah, I want that. Still, I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeking it,
I
like you
still
said.
want that, yes.
Oh, yes.
And that's our
Yeah,
overall goal.
And of
yes.
There
course,
was
I'm
a
here
lot,
for,
there was a lot of good stuff in the authorities and strategies sections as well. One of the quotes under the strategy, just overall, actually aligns with this other one that I just read about reflectors. And this in general, the world has taught us we have to push and force to make things happen. But when you go about life in the way that suits your energy, doors open, flow happens, things come together with less efforting. This is alignment. So great.
Yeah. I like a lot of how she talks about the emotional authority, and she had really described how neutral places are for decision making. And one thing I didn't love, I think it would have been nice for her to mention, is that when you have emotional authority, there's like a 55 to 60% like clarity that you get, and that was never mentioned. It was more of just like, if it's right, it'll feel good over time. And that is true, but I do think the emotional authority is a little bit tricky, especially when you're never going to get 100% certainty. And I don't feel like that was maybe covered at all in this book, and I think it could have been, but yeah. She did describe it very nicely about the highs and the lows and how the neutrality is really where the decision comes in.
and that's funny because she has emotional authority.
Yeah.
You'd expect that to be the part that was the most blown out. One of the ways I wonder about it too is I've been under transit for a couple of years now that hooks up transitoriness, which has not been the most fun I've ever had. but so going through this, like one step removed, feeling that energy from the planet, not a person. And when I've had an emotion come up about something, and I'm thinking, okay, what would it be like for an emotional authority? I, aside from look for clarity, because I always think there's a million ways of clarity. I probably can't get high enough on a mountain to have the, because what I'm really looking for is the most perfect thing, which is not going to happen. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But I wonder if it's more about an unbiased decision. So you're always going to have your preference. You're always going to have your feelings about your preference. You're always going to have your worries about it. But what if it's the sense of you've been on the high and all the outcomes attached to the hope, and you've been on the low and all the despair attached to you? What if this goes wrong and blah, blah, blah? When you reach whatever that middle is for you, it's like, okay, I've seen that and I've seen that. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. That for some people, clarity may feel like they're looking for no spots on the glass whatsoever. And you're never going to have those glasses perfectly scrubbed, but you're not so worried about this dot here and this dot here. It's that sense of, okay, I've got the picture and I'm okay with walking down this particular path. Like I hear it more as bias.
Yeah. And I like that one description I've heard, not from this book, but previously before, is it's kind of this feeling of indifference.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's like come what may, right? Like this is the right choice and it just is going to be what it is. And I like that description. But Jenna Zoe had said in the book, if something is good for you, it will evoke a sweet kind of emotion in your body just thinking about it. And I don't know if I feel like that was necessarily true for me. But overall, I do feel like she spent time focusing on that neutrality, which I think if you're going to experiment with it, like if this was the first book someone read, it would be a good jumping off point for the most part. But yeah, the emotional authority part, the description of it, I was like, I don't know. For me, it was
Right.
kind of,
Yeah, I've heard her talk the sweet before. That reminds me of how someone with gate 30 would talk about it.
And that's when human design can get difficult because there's so many nuances when you get deep into the chart. So, yeah.
Well, I even highlighted a specific quote that she said for emotional authority, it means that the right choice for you is always the one that makes you feel happy or content when you think about it. Which I actually did want to ask you, Kayla, because that's kind of not the same as neutral,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that curious?
I mean, I I don't think I would agree with that 100%. But I will say I am very much still experimenting with it, and I am very much still struggling with the neutrality that is as clear as it's going to get for me. So I am no authority by any means on telling people exactly how to use their emotional authority because I'm very much still figuring out for myself. But I would say I wouldn't 100% agree with that.
Would you, what is it, 65%? Would you 65% agree with it? For emotional clarity? Isn't it like the
No.
mid-60s?
I give it like a 40. I'm 40% clear that that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's probably, I mean, obviously she's not trying to mess with people. It's probably completely true for
No,
her. So it's just
probably is, yes.
what I like so much about the way we've been taught and how at least also the three of us have worked together. It's like, what's it like for you? Like, I think a lot of times when you get a reading, a really good analyst isn't going to be like, this is what it's like. It's almost a sense of you may, you could, you might. It's always this sense of this is like the broad stroke, but you're the one that's filling in the details. It's like it encourages you to, it's like, what is this like for me? What does clarity or peace look like for me versus satisfaction or success or whatever, or excitement? Like excitement for me could be completely different than what excitement looks like for a 3420. Just because, and how many motors, like all these things. It just encourages you to look at it as your own personal experiment, not what it's like for everybody else.
Yeah. And what it's like for you when you think you have a correct decision, and how frustrated are you when you've made that correct decision? And if you are very frustrated, like what signpost did you have with that feel good feeling or that, what you thought was emotional clarity? So, yeah, that's why it is an experiment. And that's what's nice about it.
And speaking of various signposts, and she says, the not self is just a feeling that visits to guide you. Like when I have a bitterness, a
That's very different
taste.
than how we're taught. Yeah, that's a very gentle way of looking at it.
Yes, it is.
And then so one of the next big sections that she talks about is our profiles. And Ra calls these the costumes we wear in life. And I believe there's 12 different profiles, and with the combination of two different numbers, and it's the lines from your sun and earths, both your conscious and unconscious. And for us, we have the 1-3, the 2-4, and the 3-5. And so these are some of the beginning profiles. They're all in the right angle. And it's fun for us to really talk about these different lines and how we identify with them or not. And so in this book, Jenna Zoe calls the 1-3 the knowledge seeker and the experimenter coming together for the establisher of knowledge and truth. The 2, the natural, plus the 4, the people person, comes together for the easy breezy genius. And the 3, experimenter, plus the 5, liberator, comes together for the great life experimenter. So I'd love to hear from you guys how you felt about her descriptions of these profiles.
How was it
feel
like,
like-
Kayla?
I feel like this is a section that I really liked her descriptions a lot, probably more than the other areas of the book. Um, I liked her description of the liberator for
Mm.
the 5. I had never really like heard it described like that, and I thought that was kind of a nice way to look at that. Champion the freedom and happiness of others, and everyone having a happy ending. So it's like usually with the 5, it's you kind of hear about how it's like, oh, people just have these expectations of you, but you never hear about how maybe you want those expectations, right? It's like you want people to come to you for things. I'm like, oh, I kind of like that. And then I liked her description of the experimenter a lot too, because lately I've been feeling very like, I'm not thinking of the right word, like wish-washy with stuff. Like I'll get really into something and then kind of like, oh, I don't really want to do that anymore. But the way she describes the experimenter, it's like, oh, that's actually correct for you. She had said, like, keep letting go and moving with the changes that life is nudging you towards. And I'm like, oh, that's right. Like I am here to test things out. Like that's right. That's part of what I'm supposed to do. It's not um the universe punishing me, right, for wrong decisions. It's like maybe I'm supposed to dip my toes into these things. And so I did like the description of that. Overall, I really liked the way she described them.
How do you like it with the different names without the keynoted names?
I feel like it still gets the point across.
I mean, does it resonate in a different way to call you an experimenter versus a martyr?
Yeah, it's nice. Definitely less shattering.
Yeah,
Yeah.
What do you think, Jen?
that's how I feel. Like I started this way. So when I was going through the quote shattering process, I'm like, this is terrible. Because even just like identifying as, oh, a martyr heretic, like heretic's not too bad, except you think those are the people they set on fire, right? I mean, it's true in the sense I do want to do things in a different way. Like all of it, the process of it may be correct, but if in my head I'm calling myself a martyr every time I think of human design, like you kind of create what you defend against. So I wonder sometimes, just personally, I'm not into shattering people. I do agree with her very much. And that sense of, if that's what you plant in their head, you're going to have these problems and people are going to want to set you on fire and you're up in the top floor of the house and you're peeking out, hiding behind the curtains. That might be an aspect of my experience. Or we could look at it and say, the more I open up to not getting things perfect and having a laugh about it and sharing it with people, not as a way to beat myself up, to be like, oh, I'm human, no matter what you think when you look at me, you're human too. Let's come together and have a conversation. Maybe then I get less paranoid and I'm not behind the curtains all the time. So I think that's like to me, it just takes the pressure off, because Ra talked about with the 3-5, there's a reason we're so paranoid, because he said if there's ever going to be out in the world, they're the ones that they're going to want to take a picture when we fall on our face, and it never goes away, and they're always going to hold up and say, and you messed up here and here and here. So the projection field that a 5 feels, it's like, that's not wrong, it is there. But that's also very different from the way Jenna would talk about it, which is like a lot of actors and actresses will have a 3-5 because it's magnetic. People are like, and what was it like for you? And she was always reminding people, don't try to get it perfect, share the experience, that's the point. That's a very different process than saying you better not screw up in public or it's going to be immortalized forever and you're never going to be forgotten. Like, maybe that's true, or maybe that's true around the lowest vibration, but if you're aligned with your highest self, you're not hanging out down there anyway. It won't even be part of your reality. I think they're both correct. It's just, do you want to go the rocky path, or do you just want to soar along? Like, do you want to flap the whole time, or do you want to glide? And she seems to me, when I read her and when I've gone through trainings with her and been in Q&A sessions, it is very much about, of course, develop your wings so that you can flap when you need to. But if you're in the correct jet stream, it's like, it shouldn't be that fucking hard all the time. What about you, Rebecca? People person versus opportunist, hermit or natural, completely different.
I resonate with all of them.
Hmm.
And when she described the two, she mentioned the word hermit a couple times. And she kind of like was trying to dance around it a little. And she said, you can be hermit-like, which makes sense. People person, opportunist. Yes, they're different on the one hand, but on the other hand, they go hand in hand with the description. And I really had some great takeaways. I highlighted a few things again that I just held on to and loved, and was like, okay, I'm going to take this with me. And it's an uplifting, description, like you guys are saying. So she says, the more aligned your relationships are with your real essence, the more aligned the opportunities will be that come to you, whether directly or indirectly. So again, she uses the keynote in her description. She said, you're not designed to spend time with just anybody. Once you start to honor that and don't judge it as being closed, all the support and opportunities you're designed to have in life will come to you. Who you enjoy hanging around is who you're meant to be around, which is just, to me, so impactful. And maybe it's just a lesson I need to focus on right now, and something that is something that I'm not always doing, let's just say. So I am just, when I read that, I thought, okay, that's really neat. I want to experiment with that some more. So that was one of my takeaways from that section I really liked.
Did the label matter to you? When you think of a profile name, does it matter to you to be called a natural versus a hermit?
Again, I resonate with both, and I kind of like easy breezy genius. It's kind of fun. On the one hand, it's fun. On the other hand, the easy breezy part, and even genius, you're like, am I allowed to accept that role? There's kind of a impression from society that, am I allowed to again? But then the easy breezy part too, again, maybe that's another societal thing. Like, will remind myself not to be too serious. And those are different lessons, especially projectors and different things I've heard from all kinds of different people. Just remember not to be too serious. And I think that'll come around when we talk about the gifts, and which is her description of the gates. She talks about that a lot, and a lot of the ones that I have defined are just remember not to take life too seriously. Remember to have fun.
And yours reminds me too of what she would talk about. She would call it like when you're in your magic lane, Like when you're doing what's correct for you, what's natural for you, or what the definition is in your chart. I mean, there's that sense of like, we could, you and I, Rebecca, are probably doing it with 1762, organize in different ways, but there's still a very organized way of thinking and presenting that's completely natural for us. And if you're in a job that rewards that, maybe that's 1 hour of effort for you. And for someone else, it's 5 hours and it's exhausting. So I always think that's part of when you think about as an overall line in a profile, where that's like a big part of you, not just, I don't know, maybe out of two gates, that you could probably look like easy breezy genius when you're in your lane because your vehicle is designed to travel that path, right? You've got the Jeep for the sand or the all-terrain vehicle for going up the mountain. It's like you're in the car that's right for you along the road you're supposed to be on. And I always think that's part of, I would wonder if where she came up with that overall easy breezy is you're not trying to do what you're not supposed to do. It's like a big picture alignment versus fine tuning.
And isn't it kind of interesting to think about the difference between the 2 and the 3? You guys were just talking about how you're experiencing life, meant to jump into things, bump into things and people. And then this one is more of just natural going along, as long as I follow that desire. But if I'm not, then that's where there's misalignment. And that's when I might start bumping into stuff.
Because theoretically, the channels we have in common, I probably go through much more of a trial and error phase than you would. If we're both in alignment, it's really normal for me to find the 5 doors I don't like going through, and then this one is really great. Whereas you just might like pick it right away. And we're both using essentially the same gift or the same channel. We're just approaching it in a very different way. Or Kayla might like all of a sudden have a shin knee because she bumped into it completely unconsciously, and then it's just there to deal with. But it's just a different process.
Very interesting. And there is an element of experimentation in the abstract circuitry. So that's just about experiencing life. And so another thing I love about human design is there's just all these crossovers between different things. So then like there's being called out for the line 2, that's also as a projector, recognized and invited. And so we see all these things. And then there's projected channels being called out. And I just kind of really love to use this as a tool to look at life like we're doing and to see if we can try to figure some stuff out. Maybe not. But we all love to seek the mystery of the truth. And any final thoughts on this section? There's a lot to cover in the next section too, so we'll be back with that.
I have no final thoughts. I overall enjoyed the first half of the book. I'm excited to see how she describes the gate.
Yeah, I thought it was lovely.
Yay. Well, again, be you always, an overarching theme. And we'll be back next time with the second half.